Hi, my name is Jennifer Matos. I'm the Executive Director of the Noah Webster House and West Hartford Historical Society, and I'm bringing you the 10th edition of our Armchair Tour of West Hartford history. I'm standing here at Congregation Beth Israel, which is located at 701 Farmington Avenue in West Hartford. This is the first synagogue to come to West Hartford and is considered to be one of the most beautiful synagogues in the country. But before I talk about the synagogue, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the congregation and the history of it. So up until 1843, Connecticut actually had a state law that prohibited Jewish people from worshiping openly in Connecticut. A group of Jewish residents in Hartford and New Haven actually petitioned the Connecticut state legislature to change that rule, and the law was repealed in 1843. At that point, the group that was in Hartford formed their own congregation that would become known as Congregation Beth Israel. Now, to give you a little context, at that time, around 1850, there were about 200 Jewish people living in Hartford. By 1880, there are 1,500 Jewish people, and many of them are very successful business owners. One of the early members of Congregation Beth Israel was Gershon Fox, who later became the founder of G. Fox and Company department store. As you get into the late 1880s and early 1900s, what happens in America and in Hartford as well is a huge influx of European immigrants come to the city. And what that means is that they start pushing established residents out onto the fringes. So at that point, most of the Jewish middle class was centered in the Blue Hill Ave section of Hartford. And with the influx of immigrants, we find that they start moving west onto Farmington Avenue. They start moving out on Albany Avenue and Bloomfield Avenue into Bloomfield and into West Hartford. And at that time, it becomes apparent that West Hartford should have its own synagogue. Now, in 1876, Congregation Beth Israel had built their own synagogue that was called Charter Oak Temple, and is today the site of Charter Oak Cultural Center. So they were moving from Charter Oak Temple here to this site, and it really starts getting planned in 1925. So in 1925, there are two leaders of Congregation Beth Israel. They have just hired a young rabbi named Rabbi Abraham Feldman. And then there's the president of Congregation Beth Israel, a successful businessman named Isidore Wise. And Isidore Wise actually lived in a very nice house just around the corner on Prospect Avenue. So he might have had a hand in deciding this location for Congregation Beth Israel. So in 1925, the land is purchased and plans begin. In 1936, the building is officially opened. As I was saying, this really is considered to be one of the most beautiful synagogues in the country. It's a 12-sided synagogue. It's faced in an Indiana limestone, and if you take a second to look up at it, it's got this gorgeous dome. It's an 80-foot wide dome that is covered in Spanish tile, and it was designed after Santa Sophia in Constantinople. Leading up to the synagogue, there are two sets of stairs. Each set has 7 stairs, which is symbolic in the Jewish faith. And then on either side of the stairs are 2 pylons, and the pylons take the form of a lighthouse. Inside, the sanctuary is absolutely gorgeous with fine carvings, mosaics, lots of marble and onyx and different types of stone. And then in 1950, another part of the building is added. 1953, the final part is added. And so the building is quite spectacular today. It was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1995, which is very much in recognition of its great design and beauty. I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Congregation Beth Israel in the West Hartford community. So as I mentioned, the young Rabbi Feldman took over leadership of the congregation in 1925, and so he was here when the congregation moved to West Hartford, and he became a really important community leader here in West Hartford. And one of the really amazing things that he led the congregation to do was in 1942, the First Congregational Church of West Hartford actually had this horrible fire, and most of the building, if not all of the building, was destroyed. And Rabbi Feldman and Congregation Beth Israel actually offered Congregation Beth Israel as a site for First Church congregants to meet and hold their services while their new building was being built. So they actually were continued to hold services here at this building for about 2 years. Later in 1992, Congregation Beth Israel also opens up their doors to St. John's Episcopal Church down the street, which also suffered a fire. And so I think it's a great example of how important Congregation Beth Israel has been and continues to be in the community. It's definitely one of those pieces of hidden history that you've probably walked by or driven by a million times, but might not have realized that this is one of the shining examples of synagogue architecture in the country. So I hope you learned a little bit something new about our Congregation Beth Israel as part of West Hartford's hidden history, and we'll see you next week.